Hello, and welcome to Future Farm Appalachia webinar series. Thanks for joining us. Our topic here is regenerative grazing on reclaimed mine lands. My name is John O'Niger, co-founder and principal designer at Regenerative Design Group, and I'll be facilitating this webinar and discussion with our guest Clifford Smith, CEO of Renew Appalachia, and Caleb Henshaw, Director of Reclamation and Remediation at Coalfield Development.
Hey, everyone.
Thanks, Jonna.
So we're collaborating on a project funded in part the USDA Rural Business Development Grant. The project's purpose is to provide technical assistance and rural business development training for regenerative agritech while restoring degraded forests and mine lands in Martin County, Kentucky. The aim is to convert a former coal mine site into a flourishing farm and also the ecosystem too, through a fusion of traditional wisdom, cutting-edge techniques that exemplify sustainability, permaculture, and ecological restoration. The work's also supported by the innovative folks at Regenerative Farms, Inc., who are working to solve root causes of hunger, which are land degradation, gender oppression, and poverty all over the world. So let's dive in. So what we're planning on covering today is looking at the key concepts for grazing of livestock and how those grazing patterns can help restore land on abandoned mine lands. We're going to be looking at using Lovely Valley as a abandoned mine land site as a living laboratory, so assessing the silvopasture potential, the pasture management techniques, forage quality, and infrastructure needs and uses. So we'd like to discuss some of the unique opportunities and possibilities that Cliff could consider for Lovely Valley or the larger mine property, including management recommendations and next steps. So I hope this webinar provides valuable information for working with abandoned mine lands and that it can be used to guide and inspire similar projects across Appalachia. So historically, grazing has in many cases been quite damaging to the land, and this kind of overgrazing where livestock are left on the same fields for extended periods of time can cause a lot of problems with the soil, with the water, health of the animals as well. The livestock are grazing the forages down to the soil, leaving the weeds there, that those plants take up more of the pasture. The water's not infiltrating because of compaction to the soil or loss of topsoil. And it's a problem that can lead to erosion, can lead to nutrients running off into waterways. It can increase greenhouse gas emissions. A lot of problems with this kind of grazing. And so the kinds of things that we're going to be talking about and thinking about are rotational grazing, where animals are kept in paddocks with different kinds of fencing systems, and they're kept more densely and mob grazed or grazed as larger groups with higher stocking rates, shorter periods of time, and rest in between. This is really mimicking the wild herbivores that would move through these kinds of landscapes. And other systems that we're looking at are where you add trees into pastures. So silvopasture, tree pasture. So this is an example of sheep in a chestnut orchard where they're rotationally grazed around and under the trees. And these kind of systems, you're getting improved health of the livestock from being under the trees, having some shade during the heat of the summer. You're getting the benefits of those trees, and they're providing nuts or forage fodder for the animals. So here you can see different kinds of livestock that can be utilized in a silvopasture tree cropping kind of system that's both adding to the biodiversity and also the carbon sequestration and improving the water quality in those systems as well. So here, an establishment of a silvopasture with tree tubes early on, protecting the trees from browsing, damage from the livestock, and so a lot of different ways to do that. So let's have some introductions, and there's if you want, we'll do some short introductions here, and we can do a longer introduction. If you want to hear a longer introduction, the previous video as part of this series can have some more. So Cliff, why don't you tell us a little about yourself and the project here?
Sure. Thanks, Jono. My name's Clifford Smith, and I formed Renew Appalachia in 2018. You can see are some people who have participated in our events on our site, which is targeting how to take reclaimed mine land and put it into service for the communities that surround these areas with these large landscapes. And we are looking at a variety of different uses and use cases for the land, agriculture being one area where we see a lot of promise, where we can be restoring the land and serving the community at the same time.
Great, thanks a lot, Cliff. And Caleb Henshaw, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and projects that you work on?
Sure. Again, my name's Caleb Hanshaw. I am the Director of Reclamation and Remediation at Coalfield Development. Went into a little bit more detail in the previous videos, so if you want more information, you can go to coalfield-development.org, find out about our organization. The sphere of influence that I have in our organization is reclaiming post-mine lands and using management, including regenerative grazing. So I'm excited about this talk. I'm very passionate about it, and hopefully I can stay in time because I can probably spend a couple hours talking about regenerative grazing. So I'm happy to be here.
Great, thanks a lot. And maybe we could talk a little bit, Caleb, you could talk about your background in utilizing animals and in particular pigs, and are there experiences that you've had in utilizing pigs on coalfield areas, and what the benefits are and what some of the challenges are?
Sure. Pigs are going to be the smartest animal that you have on your farm. Um, that's a surprise to some people. So the right infrastructure is important. There's nothing more than having a pig out and causing headaches, and they can be very destructive very quickly. I had a neighbor who lost some shrubs in her front yard because my pigs got out, and she wasn't too happy with me. So, but yeah, according to our grazing pattern, it boils down to what species are there, what animal can we put on the land. And there's a lot of species that, natural ruminant grazers are not going to eat. And the way that we can utilize that land and turn it into future pasture or future usable land is using pigs. Pigs naturally will root and be destructive, and we want to use them in the right window of disturbance. You can put a pig in a spot for a long period of time and wreak more havoc than good. So what we try to do is we find the sweet spot between under disturbance and over disturbance. And you can usually tell by smell, by sight. Pigs in their natural environment is the forest. This is where they want to live. So putting them in places like this, their pen's not going to smell. And that's a big misconception that pigs are supposed to stink all the time, supposed to have this really bad smell. No, they're actually fairly clean animals. They just don't sweat. That's why they want to roll in the mud and cool off. But using this regenerative rotational map is we want to make sure that we're hitting that spot with the right amount of disturbance to allow other species to catch up with these pioneer species that's taken over. So we'll go to a spot that's, overran with understory, like berry patches and autumn olive shrubs, and we'll do a line where we can get an electric fence, and we'll put them in there for about 12 to 14 days. Once we start to see, the bare soil, or we start to smell a little bit like pig, we move them along. And over time, we can turn those spaces into more pasture for our ruminant grazers or our poultry.
Great. Yeah, a little bit of a little challenging sometimes to get the right density, the right combination, and like you say, pigs can be quite challenging. And so let's talk a little bit about chickens on the landscape and the opportunity that chickens can bring to rebuilding soil, restoring areas. It's kind of probably the most well-known of some of the livestock that people raise, either on a home scale. People are familiar with some aspects of raising chickens, like their tillage and scratching, but and maybe the debugging, the eating of bugs in an area. But they can be really handy doing some of these things like fertilizing garden zones, turning compost, producing manure that can fertilize areas. It can either fertilize a field if they're rotationally grazed around an area, or taking that manure and bring it to compost piles. And so that's definitely an opportunity in some of these areas that we're talking about to have chickens. And let's see, I want to also just touch base on sheep too, because I think that's another livestock that has a lot of opportunity for grazing within these kinds of fields. And Cliff, you want to talk a little bit about the potential for sheep on the property and the exploration you've done with having a large herd, doing some rotation, some movement around the valley, and some of the pasture areas that could improve those areas as well?
Well, I think for us, when we think about our starting point as an abandoned mine land, we're dealing with conditions that are, pretty where the land has been left in a condition that's not highly suitable for a lot of agriculture to begin with. It's highly compacted. There's not a lot of carbon in the soil. It's fairly rocky. The forages that are available are limited. They're dominated by Sericea lespedeza in a lot of cases, and autumn olive. So those are two principal forages that are available to us. So with that as a starting point, a lot of people want to run cattle, and the problem is that the forages as they are really aren't suitable for cattle production unless you're doing a lot of supplemental feeding. So, we take a step back and think about, well, as Caleb said, what is already there that we can use? And in the case of sheep, Sericea lespedeza has been shown to be a natural deworming agent in the diet of these ruminants. And we know that sheep producers, number one management issue with sheep is keeping parasites down in their flock. So that's a great combination. And this issue was really brought to my attention by Patrick Angel, who started the Southeastern Kentucky Sheep Producers Association. And that has grown into one of Kentucky's largest association of sheep producers. And we're working with them on the site to do sheep grazing, but in a rotational grazing system, as as you talked a little bit about earlier, Jono. And so that's one component of multiple components that we can ultimately introduce into the grazing system on the site. So sheep and goats being one set of species. Caleb talked about pigs. You mentioned chickens, and then cattle still can be part of that equation, but
Mhm.
not in the traditional way. And
Mhm.
I think that that's kind of the direction we see going over the long term.
Yeah.
Through
Yeah.
this, we'll expect to see an improvement in the starting conditions that we were dealing with. The pastures will improve, the soil conditions will improve, and we'll have a lot more latitude in terms of how we utilize the site.
And and it does seem like there's a lot of opportunity there. It's a large area. There's a lot of diversity of different zones with different kinds of shrub and sapling regrowth, different herbs. It's a lot of sericea, the Sericea lespedeza, the nitrogen fixing shrub you're mentioning, and but some of that would start to change as the grazing is happening there. Maybe Caleb, you could talk a little bit about how you've seen grazing management happen in projects you've worked on, anything at this kind of scale where you've got a large area, which I think has a lot of opportunity, but there's also a lot of challenges both in managing the animals across the landscape like this. Anything you could add?
Yeah, I think too, one of the biggest mistakes that we try to tackle is we just do too much. We try to take a lot of acreage and put in a system that's going to cover hundreds of acres, and then you end up getting burnt out on that, and you're not providing, the nutrients that you need for your livestock, and livestock die, and then what's going on? I'm not doing this right. So I think it's okay to approach it with a small bite-sized mentality of taking pieces of land, maybe zoning them out, and for as a permaculturist, it'd take a whole family, their lifetime to reclaim 20 acres. You have that in mind. You know, we don't want to do this one size fits all thing. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to mimic natural migration patterns. That's the whole gist of rotational grazing. There's if you remove the barriers, your animals are going to move. They're going to go to new land. They're going to eat the forages that they like, that their body wants. Um, if we're keeping them in one spot, they're going to overgraze. Again, like you said, and the problem with overgrazing is it ruins your soil biology. If just let's just look at that. You get a blade of grass that's 8 inches tall. You want that cow to cut that in half, and when it does, it's going to attract carbon within the soil and release it. But the roots aren't going to die. The roots are going to continue to grow, continue to aerate, continue to go deeper into the soil to aerate it, to provide glucose even further down into the soil biology. When you overgraze, you kill the growth of the roots. So it has to restart. So we move our animals every day. And there's an important piece to having a diverse rotational grazing system. Depending on what you have available, the more animals, the better. That doesn't mean you have to get 100 cow and 100 sheep. You could do 3 cow and 4 sheep. And the reason why you want to have a diverse rotational grazing system is that that's what nature does. A cow's going to eat something different than a sheep will. A sheep's going to eat something different than a chicken will. And because that is, they're also going to attract different forms of bacteria within the soil. They're going to attract different species that grow on your pasture. You want diversity. You want diverse forages. And the only way to get there is to provide a demand. I think that supply and demand work here. It works in many areas, especially here. If there's a demand for it, it will grow. That's why you see an influx of lespedeza. Lespedeza is a nitrogen fixing legume. It is mining nitrogen from the atmosphere into the soil because it lacks that from the previous activity. So we've found that cows will eat Lispedeza, but when it's really young. So when it's really small and it's really easy, it's really soft. They don't prefer it though. And to Cliff's point, you can graze cows on landscapes like this, but it's not traditional. You can't just let them loose. You're going to end up killing them because they're going to be so nutrient deficient in terms of their diet, just having Lespedeza.
Yeah,
But
they
they'll
really got
eat
to
it
get
when
used
they're
to it.
they'll
Do
eat
you,
it when they're young. We'll move them along. The sheep will come in behind them, and they'll eat Lespedeza when it's midlife, when it's like a rebellious teenager at that point. They'll eat it. They'll knock it down. Will they prefer something else above that? Absolutely. I think that you got to be careful on just feeding sheep just Lespedeza. From the tannin levels, we've seen a lot of things with that, but when you bring poultry behind them, you were talking about in the graph, chickens will reduce the pest cycle for a year for a fruit tree. Well, they'll also cut off the parasite cycle in your livestock.
yeah.
They'll find the parasites in the paddocks that they were in, and this is what nature does. If you were to go out and look at a pasture for a month, you would see a large ruminant animal coming in, and then as they pass, you'll see a smaller ruminant animal like a deer come in, and then you'll see these aerial poultry come in and shift through the cow pies, and this is the pattern that nature gives us. So if
Yeah.
you were just to really make it simple, regenerative grazing is mimicking those natural migration patterns. And when you do that, especially if you're using smaller ruminant animals like sheep, like the project Cliff's doing, you're going to see a dramatic impact quicker than if you were to do a traditional cow grazing operation because it's very intentional.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
going off of the pattern like Alan Savory and his institute, he doesn't do it in a grid pattern, just moving it next toward because animals aren't going to do that naturally anyways. But depending on your infrastructure, that's what we follow because we're not up there all the time. You can just move them along as long as they're moving every day.
Yeah, you're
You're gonna
getting that rotation just by encouraging them to move on to the next field area, which they want to do. They want to get to the new fields, new forages. Do you, Caleb,
yeah.
a question for you is, have you worked where you're taking advantage of some of the tree and shrub growth and either chopping it down from where it's too above their reach and letting them feed on that, or coppicing, cutting it low, and that they're feeding on the resprouts, so you're getting some of the woody forages into their diet? Have you worked with that at all?
Absolutely. We want to be resourceful, so we want to use what we have, right? One particular, and Cliff mentioned it, was the autumn olive. Autumn olives are a nitrogen fixer as well. They're a shrub. They will be rapidly, I don't want to use the word invasive, but they will spread because there's a demand and they grow quickly. We can take that and use it as feed for pigs will eat it, sheep will eat it, cows will sometimes eat it. And if you put them in a paddock where you can get a height where it provides some shade, we'll look over there and the cows will be chomping on it. Animals will tend to gravitate towards things that they need. And even looking at what the autumn olive produces for human consumption, there's a medicinal value for there. It also provides the same thing for animals. So, yeah, I think using what you have and introducing diversity, the worst thing that can happen is they don't eat it. And it
Yeah.
sits there in the paddock and it begins to decompose. You begin to feed the soil. You begin to attract the soil players that you didn't have before. So it's a win-win no matter what.
Yeah. Oh, it's great. That's great. Appreciate hearing your perspective on that. I'm wondering if maybe we shift to some of the logistics and some of the infrastructure needs for ranging livestock and some of both the challenges, the costs, and do you have some initial thoughts on what you'd like to see happening Cliff, and what kinds of fencing systems you've been considering?
Yeah. So back to Caleb's comment about the grid system and how you would sort of conceptually lay out a rotational grazing activity. The way we're conceiving of it on our site is that we have a grid that acts as a raceway so that the animals work their way down the track, and they go around the corner and they come on back and then around a corner again, and they start all over again. So it's set up, at least in concept, as a raceway. But within that raceway, then you want to be able to control and fence them in the area you would like them to be in, and then be able to easily then define a new area to move them into. And so these concepts you're showing, Jono, are different ways to help control where the animals are grazing. Um, you can, uh, if you have the budget, you could go with these whole virtual fence systems that have collars and you lay it out on your phone. But we have migrated more to these movable poly net type uh, systems. And there you can, if you think about it, you're making a square and you can very quickly move your square and continue to keep one edge of it in place. So you don't have to move the entire square to your next grid location. Um, you can move a portion or three sides of it to make a new square. So that's the essence of one of the systems that we use. Guard dogs are also a component of that system, so that through the night we have protection of the sheep flock with a guard dog.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of people will use those kind of polywire movable fence systems where you can set up the next paddock for the animals while they're still working on where the existing paddock, and then you're basically just opening a gate and allowing them into the next one. So you sort of have a pretty easy moving system because they want to go to the next paddock. They want to go to the fresh forages, and so you can kind of move them along in that pattern that you set up pretty easily. And I think, to go back to what you were talking about, Caleb, of the multi-species, or following, if you did cattle and then sheep and then chickens, or different kinds of rotations with different animals, you can use that same kind of rotational grazing system. You're just managing which animals are in which paddocks as they move through. So a lot of opportunity there. And maybe to go back to some of the logistics and the other factors which we could consider are water and bringing water to livestock. What are some different ways? Here's some examples of water systems. What are some ways that you all have either considered it, Cliff or Caleb, if you want to jump in and talk about different kinds of watering systems, bringing water to paddocks, to livestock out in fields. Do you have any preferences or types of systems that you like to use?
Well, I'll start and then I'll let Caleb jump in. In our prior discussion, the prior webinar, we talked about the prevalence of water in this region. So we get pretty consistent precipitation. It's about 4 inches a month in and month out. There's some months where it's a little drier and some that are a little wetter, but so we get a lot of rainwater, and these sites generally, the abandoned mine lands don't have municipal water supplies. You may be able to get a well in, but rainwater is a very attractive solution. And the very first step in that is catching it. So building ponds And that's with Sexpa. That's what the sheep producers in Kentucky. That's the work they've done. They've been successful at rainwater collection in ponds to be able to satisfy the needs of the livestock. But then there's the question of moving the water around or having it available in the different locations that you may need it, given where your animals are. And some people would use like a water wagon, and then you have some of these solutions you show here,
Mhm.
uh, Jono. But
Mhm.
Caleb, you may have some more specific experience that you can talk about over at Highwall.
Yeah, I think to just context is we're very project driven. It's not like a homestead. So the things that we put in place have to make sense in terms of our day to day and what the time that it takes. So we try to make everything mobile because
Mm.
we're moving animals. We want to move their water source as well. But just to really reiterate what Cliff's talking about is rainwater is going to be your best resource. Is how can I capture rainwater? How can I keep it moving on the landscape? How can I keep it from being stagnant? How can I, filter it where it's because rainwater is not perfect, especially where we're at. I mean, you're going to have some contaminants from the rainwater itself. So how can we filter that out? How can we use waterers that pigs can't knock over? Because that's going to tack on extra time in our day. So we even, use, 55-gallon barrels that move along the landscape with their pigs and attach it is what we call a pig nipple, where they learn how
Mhm.
to get water from there. They can't, get in the water and splash around. They can't knock it over. So anything that makes it functionally make sense, we gear towards.
Mhm.
But you want to look at sustainability. You want to be able to catch the water that falls on your landscape and move it along where your animals are going to be. So that's what I would suggest. Now you can always pump out of ponds. If you wanted to make it really simple, look where water is pooling on your landscape or where water is flowing, where you see erosion or where you have a big rain, you have, a lot of water just sitting there. Well, that's a good indication where you could probably put a pond there and capture water there and use it and pump it out and feed your animals with.
Mhm. Mhm. Would you generally, Caleb, when you're setting up a system like that, you're thinking about pumping it from the pond into some kind of tank or some kind of water trough so that you can bring that water to the paddocks where the animals are going to be?
Yeah, if you have a smaller landscape, let's say 10 acres or lower, and you have like a side by side or a farm truck, you can pump it out of the ponds into a container and go where you need to go with your animals. If you're looking at a bigger landscape, like
Mhm.
100 acres, I would look at where your high points are on your property. Where's the highest elevation? Where can I put a rain collection system to where then I can gravity feed along the entire landscape? Or if it's just sections, maybe you have 4 sections where you have high points where you can capture rainwater on a roof, or you can pump it from a lower pond into these containers, and then you can just gravity feed wherever your animals are going to be because again they're moving, they're not going to be at the same spot. So profiting from your high points on your landscape is pretty important as well. It just depends on what size landscape makes sense. That wouldn't make a
Mhm.
lot of sense if you have 5 acres, which it could. You could still use that same concept, but whatever allows you to make chores quicker and more functional, I say do that.
Mhm. Mhm.
100%. Yeah, and on the site, that you've shown for us, Jono,
Mhm.
in the prior slide, it is a relatively large site. It's maybe 200 acres in total. There are very high areas on that site where we can, the one thing about water is we know it flows downhill. So
Mhm.
use gravity, as Caleb said. You can even
Yep.
use, even on a flat looking pasture like you're looking at into here, that pastures actually has a slope, and you can move from pond to pond to pond throughout this site, and do some collection around each of those ponds as well. And then, if you're thinking holistically over the long term, you can begin imagining contour lines and silvopasture additions into that, and and suddenly have a really multi-functioning ecosystem restoration engine happening on your
Mhm.
farm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I would add too, just quickly, like it's why it's important to look at your GIS map and to look at, your LiDAR contour maps. And even from the get-go, I think it's important to have, what's a perfect plan look like and how can I spend the next 10 to 15 years working towards that plan? So as Cliff is saying, like look at your contour lines, look how your water is flowing on your landscape. If you don't know how to read that, get with somebody that does. I know somebody here on this call that could do that named Jono. So learn how your water is flowing on your landscape because that's going to determine where you want to graze your animals. If you don't have a water source, I don't think I want to graze my animals in a place I can't get water to. So just going on Cliff's point, so important is having that water plan. Step one, seeing where can I move water on the landscape? How are the slopes and all that? So that's really, really, really important.
That's great. I think we've had a great discussion. I'd like to take the last few minutes, give us a little bit of time to talk about some takeaways or what kind of recommendation you'd give to somebody who's just getting into this, who's putting together their ideas. They might have some land or they're looking for land. Why don't we each give a recommendation of something we'd really encourage somebody to do or think about as they're getting started. So either of you want to jump in?
Yeah, I can go. No, just a few things. They're just practical. One,
Mm-hmm.
you need to get with a community that's doing this already. That's going to save you a lot of time and asking questions and help developing a plan. And number two, use what you have. Fencing can be expensive. I mean, you can get up there. I always, do the grid system. That's the easiest way to graze. Start there. Use what you have. I mean, you can even use natural barriers on the landscape. Um, or you can do Little House on the Prairie. You can get a cow, tie a rope around its neck, and stake it in the ground.
Mm-hmm.
How can you find out about these things? Well, you're a part of a community that's done them before. Number one, get plugged into a community like Cliff was talking about being a part of the Sheep Association in Kentucky. That relationship's probably been super beneficial for Cliff in this project. So connect with someone, ask questions, and just use what you have.
Great. That's great. Super.
Yeah.
Cliff, how about you?
Well, yeah, I guess I talked a lot about water, and obviously we all need water. So the animals need water to live. So you got to get your water down. But you also have to remember too much water can be a problem. So you have to manage your water. You have to think, for example, with sheep, the benefit of a mine site ironically is that it's rocky and can be dry, and so hoof problems can be reduced by rotating these sheep on these sites as long as they're not in mud, not in a muddy, site. So you got to manage your water that way too. So think about both sides of your water equation, which really work together because you, in managing water, are trying to manage where it is and how you can use it.
Yeah, that's great. I think I would add, well, one really important piece is, when you're bringing livestock uh, onto a landscape and you're taking on care, it's a lot of work. They don't take a day off. They need attention every day, and so really planning it out well, thinking through how you're bringing the animals around the landscape, how you're bringing in supplemental feed, how you're bringing in water, getting a good plan, and then also have a number of animals and a system that's going to match the capacity of your land, so that you're not overwhelming it, so that it feels like you have the ability to give them the care that they need. So a lot of things to think about. I think we touched on some of it. Pretty complex topic, but I'm really glad to have been talking with you, Caleb and Cliff, and thanks a lot for all of your ideas and thoughts on this.
You, Jono.
Thank you.